Hello. Today we're going to look at the third period of Beethoven's life after a short recap of what we talked about on our previous lecture. I want to encourage you to go ahead and take a moment to get a pencil and paper or to open an email so that you can jot down a couple of things and send those to me at the conclusion of our taping. And in advance, I'm going to apologize for any problems with the audio related to the clips that I play. I will try to tell you what I'm playing so that you can go back and find it on your own and possibly listen to it so that you get full benefit of that. I'll do what I can to let us know what's going on here. So we're finishing up in Grout, our chapter 24, which is Revolution and Change. And it's that time period. Remember that we were talking about the end of the 1700s being the French Revolution time, coming out of the Enlightenment period. The States have already had our revolutionary time. Napoleon over in France was a key figure in that revolution for the French. And Beethoven was steeped in that. And in his second period, you recall that we were talking about his Symphony No. 3, the Eroica, which was originally written as an homage to Napoleon. And then when Napoleon declared himself to be emperor, he scribbled out the dedication and made it about call it the Eroica instead of whatever it was going to be called. So that's the second period, and that's kind of where we wound down with the fifth and the sixth symphonies, which can kind of finish that off that second period. He bounced around for a couple of symphonies and for a period of time up until about 1815, which is when Napoleon died. Napoleon was no longer emperor, and that was a great relief to Beethoven, and his later works in his third period reflect that to a great deal. There were some aspects about life in general that we'll touch on in our next lecture, but I want to just hedge on or mention here. One of those was the rise of the piano. It had been pretty much brought into existence 100 years earlier and was in mass production now and affordable. And so that kind of fueled some of the changes in what kind of music was being performed and who was performing that. And then in addition to that, in the mid 1810s, like 1813, 14, 15, the valve system for the modern trumpet was invented, and that was a humongous change for some of the instrumentation and the orchestras. Speaking of instrumentation, one of the things you'll note is that if we enter this third period and we talk about some of the different pieces that Beethoven wrote, we're not going to talk about too many, but one of the main things that you notice as you watch the development of the orchestra is the size of the orchestra. And I mentioned this earlier. Haydn, Mozart might have written for 20 to 25, maybe 30 instruments, including all of the string players and whatever winds they used. By the time we get to the Ninth Symphony, you'll see that the orchestra and the forces are huge in numbers. And so if you were programming for a Beethoven piece, you can just automatically expect to hire between 60 and 70 musicians to play, depending on the piece that you're playing. So let's jump in and look at a couple things. Gonna have to skip a bit, brother, and I'm gonna slide through these slides because I didn't advancement of time ahead of time. You remember that the three periods that you sent on the last email, you answered one of the questions about the three periods and the general time frame of those three periods. His only work is only opera being Fidelio. Here we go. We're winding down pastoral something. By 1814, he's at the peak of his popularity, and that's really just before he starts that later period in life. So some of the characteristics of that, he's by this time he's profoundly deaf. You know, he knew he was going deaf in 1802, 03. He was working on the Heiligenstadt Testament that was his declaration of, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to go ahead and live my life regardless of whether I'm deaf or not. But because of that deafness, isolation from what's going on around him, and more of an internal focus, and it slowed down his composition process, because he can't sit there at the piano and peck things out. So that was a problem. Now we see on this last thing the currency devaluation of 1811, and then the reduced value of an annuity, and that goes toward his process of income. He was one of those composers who is part of the transition from sponsorship. Mozart and the House of Esterhazy, Haydn playing for whoever he was playing for, and being those guys and musicians in general, artists, were all part of maybe a court system or a city system. And Beethoven is one of those first kind of guys who is writing for particular people, for when they pay money and they say, I want to hire you to write this piece. And so along with that, this currency devaluation of 1811 took a toll on his income. An annuity is an income that comes once a month or once every 6 months, or however that is. And it's based on having a chunk of money over here that's paying you a certain dividend over time. And when your currency is devalued, that dividend is devalued as well. So defeat of Napoleon, 1815, and then the post-war depression, and then as part of that, Napoleon is no longer with us. At that time, he wrote then 2 large public works that kind of are the symbol of his later period. The Missa Solemnis, or the Solemn Mass, written earlier in 1819 to 23, includes the general portions of the Mass, but at great length. And then the Ninth Symphony, it was composed between 1822 and 24, shortly before his death. And you've probably heard the story that when he finished that, he was playing the organ, which faces the organ and not the audience. And so somebody had to actually physically turn him around to see the reaction of the audience, which was absolutely enthusiastic. We just had a little blurb in our electricity. So he also did private music making because of the rise of the piano, started writing piano sonatas and songs for piano and voice, and then 5 string quartets. Okay, and these compositions are for connoisseurs or people who like to study music, to dig into it. I don't have it here. I have at home a book about an inch and a half thick, larger than 8.5 by 11. That is just his scores, the 9 symphonies scores, and it's to be studied. He wrote these things to be studied, and he was looking at using the musical language of the time and expanding that musical language, expanding the idea of how long to sit and listen, and expanding the tools of composition, such as the contrasts, the style contrasts, the figuration. You'll hear some of that as we listen to some of our pieces later on. We're not going to listen to the piano sonata in E major, Opus 109. Sure would encourage you to at some point listen to that. Very interesting piece. We're going to move on though. And this is a little bit about some of his string quartets. My own children have performed some of his string quartets, and they're fascinating if you know what you're listening for. And in these string quartets, he's using, we've talked in some of our classes about the form, the sonata form, binary form, the exposition, development, and recapitulation. And these string quartets are written with those kinds of ideas in it that really get involved. And you see here the words imitation and fugue. And if you've taken composition class, then you know a little bit about the process of composition that brings us the series, species 1, species 2, 3, and 4, that are the root of the imitation and fugue stuff. You can see that here in this illustration where we have da 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 da, and that goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4 measures, and then in comes the next part echoing that, and in this case that would be the second violin, da 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 da, and then instead of going up, it comes down, da 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 da, and then it carries on while the third part, or the viola, comes in and echoes kind of that same thing. And then about 4 measures later, the next the cellist comes in, and so we have this nod back to, looks an awful lot like Palestrina, except for the rules that Palestrina would have used as far as who comes in when, who plays when. But there it is. So the Ninth Symphony then has some of those same kinds of characteristics in it. And then it has it's reconceiving a multi-movement form. Excuse me. And you can see this form. This is in the text. If you want to look at that, you know where the texts are located. So you can look at this particular illustration that shows the different forms that are represented in that piece. We're going to go on to here we go. A little bit of the Missa Solemnis. It's a mass. It is not written necessarily to be performed as a church service. It is written, and you can perform it in a church, but it's really written more for the concert stage. So here is just a little bit of the Kyrie. Kyrie, remember, has the Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison, that 3-part setting. We're not going to listen far enough to hear all 3 of those parts, but this will give you a sense of, you're looking at the size of the orchestra. You have a choir singing and the soloist singing, and that all shifts around, and then you have the nature of the piece. Just hope you can hear this. see that in this piece, we're not even in the fourth way in, and we've only gotten through the Kyrie saying it, and we've heard eleison once. So we're in for if the Kyrie lasts over 12 minutes, and the Mass, and that's the short one of the Mass, you're in for a concert. You're not there for a church service. Okay. That was the Kyrie from the Missa Solemnis. If you ever get a chance to listen to that, it's just a beautiful whole piece to sit through. Infinitely more interesting if you do a little bit of study ahead of time, read about the setting and the different, the time period, what's going on. A little bit of that you already know just from listening to and thinking about his life in the 1820s. But also, if you can grab a score and kind of follow along with it, that would help too. The Ninth Symphony was written for solo voices and chorus in the finale. It is 5 movements long. By this time, the symphony is established as a 4-movement piece. His other symphonies are all 4 movements. Haydn and Mozart really set up that model, and most composers, are 4 movements long, and they have a specific pattern: allegro, usually an adagio, minuet trio, and then a scherzo or presto. The Ninth Symphony tacks on that 5th movement, so it's well over an hour in length. I think I sat through a performance one time that was an hour and 10 to 15 minutes long, and that was kind of fast. The Ode to Joy really shows up in the 5th section, in the 5th, and that's when the chorus comes in as well, and the singers. And one of the unique things about this, and this is one of those things that, in fact, this is the thing that I would like for you to write down in your email or your notes to me, that you're going to either send to me an email to david.roman@swcu.com, .edu, or slip under my door on that piece of paper that you fill out. And this is one of the first examples, really the first example of, in the symphony genre, the presence of the voices, the chorus, and the soloists. The symphony started its development in the mid-1700s with Haydn, really kicked it off. There were a few symphony-like things going on already. Haydn, Mozart, purely instrumental. Early Beethoven, purely instrumental. 8 different symphonies that are instrumental pieces. Here we go in the 1822 to 24 timeframe, when it's performed as 1825. And in the last movement, it is symphony, orchestra with chorus and soloists. You'll see about 8 bass players. You'll see bassoons, a contrabassoon at one point, which is a bassoon that's bigger and kind of bend over around a little bit. You'll see clarinets, the new development in clarinets and the modern flute, really in the early 1800s as well. English horns and oboes, which have been around for a long time. You'll see a plethora of violins. The modern trombone is starting to come out now. Again, the modern trumpet has been developed and is used now. And one of the things that is unique about this piece, and it is a sign of the times, is that about 10 years before this time, the metronome has been developed. And so now composers are starting to put in like quarter note equals 120 or quarter note equals 90 or half note equals whatever. And they're assigning a time value to what has traditionally been an emotional value or a sense value or a dance value. When you have Bach writing a saraband, he's not writing a piece at a certain tempo. He's writing a piece that goes like a saraband of the dance, or a pavan is a dance, a jig is a dance that they would have done. And so when they hear those phrases, when they hear the word adagio, an image of how the music is to be played pops in their heads. When they hear the word allegro, an image of how the music is to be played. But now, in this time frame, we're starting to see assignation or an assignment of how much time should be allowed and put into a certain piece. So here we go. This is a little bit, oops, wrong computer. This is a little bit of the Ninth Symphony. We're going to pick it up toward the end of the fourth movement with some low strings. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Listen to this. Thematic material right here. Barenboim connecting. Go again with the low strings, giving us this thematic material. Listen very closely. Bassoons and woodwinds. There's your 8 bass players right there. Here you see the top of the F attachment trombone. It has additional tubing and makes it so it can go lower. Bassoons, clarinets, flute, English horn. Listen, remember this little phrase. One of the things that he does is brings these little thematic pieces across movements, and it kind of ties the piece together. Now we're moving into that fifth movement. Low strings. Ode to Joy is this tune. We think of the song Joyful, Joyful, yet early, but that text is from the 1907. We have the violins repeating the theme of the counter melody while the songs. If they treatment, it's not boring yet, it's really getting exciting. Building to it. Listen to us coming not yet. This is
nicht diese Töne, sondern lass uns angenehmere anstimmen und
This is the original text.
Wir betreten feuertrunken dein Heiligtum. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng getrennt. Andere Menschen werden brüllen, und ein sanfter Flügel weilt. Deine Zauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng getrennt.
conducting the symphony, number 9, unit 4. If you want to look at this later on, the whole symphony has these little nuggets in there that tie it all together. But it's just a fun symphony to watch. It's even more fun to sing, to be a part of the performance of this particular symphony. This text is the original text, as I mentioned earlier, the actual text that we know and love. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before us all, written in the 1907 time frame. And it's in quite a few hymnals. So we're going to get to, I'm going to try and make up for this contribution. Change coming on. After same melody, a minuet treatment. All right. So in this process of living across the bridge of the late 1700s to the early 1800s, of composing in his early styles shaped by Mozart and Haydn as his mentors, as people that he was working with, friends with, and shifting over into hard, definite romantic ideas, romantic sonorities, really solidified what for the next century became the main idea of music, and that is, of course, the romantic view that gives us such great music. Okay. Let's see. This is a little bit of the Sixth Symphony. I wanted to play just a recap. This is my favorite of most of his symphonies. This is, I think, one of the best, whatever it is, movements. Just a little bit of fun here. We won't listen to much of it. Just kind of feel the sense of peace. This is written after that Fifth Symphony that was just full of vim and vigor. Symphony number 6 brings back that sense of calmness. Fifth Symphony representing sort of his struggle with his coming to grips with his deafness and the fact that that was just going to be his life. And then the Sixth Symphony is just giving us that peace that comes from reconciling himself to that idea. So that's the third time period of Beethoven. You're going to send that bit of information about the Ninth Symphony that I asked for a little bit ago. And I'll see you in the next time. Great place to end. Woohoo! Bop. Have a good day.